Imagine a husband being hustled onto the back of a truck with other prisoners of war, with a final opportunity to whisper some words of comfort to his wife, whom he would never see again. What would you say? Well, Charles Russell Deibler leaned over the tailgate, received from the loving hand of his wife a pillowcase stuffed with a few basic necessities, and whispered these words to her. Remember one thing, dear. God said that he would never leave us nor forsake us. Where did Russell develop such conviction? It didn't simply come to him out of nowhere in that grueling moment. God had graciously fulfilled that promise over and over to Russell as he followed Christ. He had taken God at his word and knew he could keep doing so. I'm John Crocker.
And this is Tim Berry.
We will hear about Charles Russell Deibler on today's episode of Pocketing God's Promises. Welcome to Pocketing God's Promises, a practical podcast where we consider inspiring stories of missionaries and gospel workers of the past and reflect on timeless truths that still transform our lives today. Whether you're a pastor, parent, missionary, or another believer seeking to live a life of deeper consecration to Christ, this podcast is for you. Join us as we learn from these examples of the past to take God at His word today.
Many of us know his wife, Darlene McIntosh, better than we know the name of Charles Russell Deibler. He went by Russell, so we'll refer to him that way in this episode. Russell married Darlene McIntosh. She was age 20. By age 26, she was widowed. But as John mentioned in the opening words of the episode, this man who leaned over the tailgate of the truck and whispered these words from Hebrews 13:5 to his young wife. How did he get this conviction? Now, really, the conviction that God would be with them and never leave them nor forsake them, no matter where they went, is something that we see over and over in the life of this man. I want to relate some different anecdotes from his life where we see how wherever he went, God was with him. It even starts before he ever met Darlene McIntosh, the Darlene who would become his wife. It starts as a single missionary to the interior of Borneo among the Dayak peoples. He and other missionaries were those who saw the dedication of the first ever church building among the Dayak peoples. It's obvious that even there, God was with him in helping him build his church, and literally even a church building. And what I love about the story is how he tells about how the building was fully financed and built by themselves. The whitewashed walls, the rough benches, all paid for by the believers. And he records the humorous way in which the building filled. They sounded the gong, and by the third gong sounding that Sunday morning, 500 Dayaks or so had assembled in the church, men on the right, women on the left. And then some more came in, and they weren't used to having benches in a building like this, and they didn't realize you should walk down the aisles and then find a bench that had an empty seat. So they just kind of hopped over the benches there until they found one where they could sit down. But the excitement of that service, and then again at the end, when the service ends, they're asked to stand for the dedicatory prayer. And again, they're used to sitting on the ground, and then when you stand up on the ground. And so, well, when you're sitting on a bench and you're asked to stand up, where do you stand? You stand on the bench. And so they stood up on the bench for that final prayer at the end of the dedication service. And again, as they dismiss, you have hundreds of people in this building. There's only 2 doors, and so they're all trying to exit. And, well, why should you wait for the door? We have windows. And so many of them just exited through the windows. This was the dedication of the first ever church building among the Dayak peoples. And again, the Lord was with him wherever he went, even into Borneo, in the establishing of this of the church there. And then you see it again in his life as he comes back on his first furlough. Again, a single missionary. He's speaking at a young people's rally, and he notices this girl. And he thinks to himself, this is the girl I am to marry. First time he ever saw her. Well, they managed to speak briefly at the end of that service, but it's not till the next year that he works out a way to have a first date. And on that first date, conversation's a little bit awkward. Things aren't flowing real well. And so Darlene is trying to figure out how to move the conversation along more smoothly. And she says something like, how about a penny for your thoughts? And he says, do you really want to know what I'm thinking? And he tells her that the first time he saw her, he knew that she was the girl that he was going to marry. Well, they did end up getting married. But again, you see the Lord providing for this man the helpmeet that he would need. Wherever he went, the Lord was with him. You see the Lord's presence with him even after they go back now as a married couple. They go back to the Dutch East Indies, what is today Indonesia. And he goes on this grueling 14 mountain range, 18-day trek into the interior of New Guinea. Partway through that journey, he's not even sure that he's going to make it to the end of the journey. He's got national carriers that aren't used to any kind of trek into the interior. They're from the coast. They're not from the mountains. His own energy is depleted. He's physically hurting. He wakes up New Year's Day morning. He opens his Bible to Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, and he reads of the promise of the Lord's presence to Joshua. Be not afraid, neither be dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest, wherever you go. And on the strength of that promise, he continues. And a few days later, he arrives in the interior at a government post in Dutch New Guinea, the first missionary to ever enter that area. The wherever you go is in the life of Russell Deibler. And it continues even after he is herded off in that truck and taken away from his wife of only 4.5 years. And even there in a Japanese internment camp, away from his wife, the Lord is with him. Every Sunday, he's allowed to leave his prison camp and go to a military prisoner of war camp. And there he ministers to the American and British prisoners, and his messages are a great help to them. His Christmas Eve sermon in 1942 was never forgotten by many who heard it. And even at his graveside service, where a simple wooden cross was placed above his earthly remains, a Dutch gentleman gave his heart to Christ. To the very end, and even after his spirit had left his body for the heavenlies, Christ was with Russell Deibler. In fact, the doctor who attended Russell in his final days discovered that Russell had a serious heart condition. If he would have survived the dysentery that took his life, he may not have been able to continue as a pioneer missionary. It was the grace of his ever-present Christ who took his war-torn soldier home.
As I think about these anecdotes and how to apply this to my life, this promise of Christ's presence seen in the life of Charles Russell Deibler, I'm reminded that God uses our present obedience to fortify us for future obedience. Russell would not have been ready to be whisked away to a prisoner of war camp unless he had spent years pocketing God's promise and living by it. He could minister deep comfort to his wife in a moment of unspeakably intense trial because God had prepared him through past experiences of his grace. He had seen the fulfillment of this promise in so many different ways over his years. This church planting, the need, the way that God provided for him for a helper, a wife, and then this further ministry, this trek and ministry through his life, through these different experiences. God proved himself true to his word. And that is actually how God prepared Deibler for that moment to whisper those words of comfort to his wife. And I need this. I need to act on God's words today. And it's actually by doing that God fortifies me for the future.
I think Russell's life illustrates that the wherever you go as a part of the promise of God's presence or Christ's presence with us does not mean we will never face trouble. In fact, Jesus said the opposite, John 16:33, in the world you will have tribulation. This is why he promised his presence. He knew what taking back territory from Satan's kingdom would cost. He does not promise freedom from tribulation, sickness, disappointment, or pain. What he promises is that when you pass through the waters, as the Old Testament puts it, I will be with you.
Many have observed over the years that it is in the waters where God's people actually experience deeper appreciation and comfort through his presence. Really, it's when we're without any other source of help that we really learn to appreciate and enjoy the promise of Christ's presence with us. And that does motivate us. We can stake everything, absolutely everything, on the promise of God. We can stake our health, our reputation, our relationships, finances, even our very lives. And we know that Christ will be with us. Even if every other source of comfort or help is 10,000 miles away, and even especially when every other source of help is gone, Jesus is near.
I want to encourage especially those who have gone or those who are going for the sake of Christ to make disciples of all nations in his name. The context of that promise, lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age, is given especially to those who go. One of the reasons that Russell Deibler so experienced the presence of Christ is that he went. He went to the jungles of Borneo. He went to the interior of Dutch New Guinea. He went into the prisoner of war camp in order to minister to them even in a time of great difficulty. And it's like someone has said, if there's no go, there is no lo. The lo, I'm with you always, is for those who will go and make disciples of all nations.
Thank you for listening to Pocketing God's Promises, a podcast of GFA Missions. If we could serve you or help you as you carry out the Great Commission, please visit us at gfamissions.org/pocketing. Until next time, remember to pocket God's promises and take Him at His word today.